The winter wind howled across the Montana plains like a living thing intent on devouring everything in its path. And Carson Irving had just finished securing the last of his cattle when he saw what looked like a bundle of rags collapsed against his front gate. At first, he thought it might be some animal that had wandered too close and succumbed to the brutal cold. But as he rode closer on his chestnut mare, his heart seized in his chest. It was a woman, her lips blue, her clothes soaked through with melted snow, one pale hand still reaching toward the wooden crossbar as if she had been trying to pull herself up when consciousness finally left her. Carson threw himself from his horse without bothering to tie her up, his boots crunching through the frozen ground as he ran the last few feet. "Madam, can you hear me?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, rusty from weeks of speaking only to livestock and the occasional hired hand who came by to help with the heavier work. The woman did not respond. Her chest barely moved beneath her threadbare coat, and when he pressed his calloused fingers to her throat, her pulse fluttered weak as a dying butterfly. Carson did not hesitate. He scooped her into his arms, shocked at how light she was, how fragile she felt against his chest. She was young, he realized, probably not much more than 20, with honey-colored hair that had frozen into icy strands around her face. He kicked the gate open with his boot and carried her toward his house, a modest two-room cabin that sat at the base of the rolling hills that made up his ranch. Smoke still curled from the chimney from the fire he had built that morning, and he thanked God for small mercies as he shouldered the door open. The warmth hit them both immediately, and Carson moved quickly to lay her on the braided rug in front of the stone fireplace. Her clothes were worse than he had thought, soaked completely through, and he knew if he did not get them off her, she would die from the cold that had already seeped into her bones. His hands shook slightly, not from cold but from something else entirely. He was a decent man, raised right by his mother before she passed, and the thought of undressing an unconscious woman made his stomach twist with discomfort. But decency would not save her life, and survival mattered more than propriety in this moment. He worked quickly, peeling away her coat and dress with clinical efficiency, keeping his eyes focused on the task rather than on her. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then in the thick bearskin his father had left him before heading further west 10 years ago. Only her face remained visible, pale as the snow outside, and he built up the fire until the flames roared and heat filled the small room like a blessing. Carson heated water in his largest pot and soaked clean cloths in it, pressing them gently to her hands and feet to warm them gradually. He had seen frostbite before, had watched a man lose 3 toes to it one terrible winter, and he prayed this woman had not been out in the cold long enough for that fate. Her fingers were pale but not blackened, and as the warmth began to seep back into her body, color slowly returned to her cheeks. He stayed beside her for hours, feeding the fire, changing the warm cloths, watching the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Night fell outside his windows, and still she did not wake. Carson found himself studying her face in the firelight, wondering who she was and what had brought her to his gate in the middle of a Montana winter. She was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache, with delicate features and long lashes that cast shadows on her cheeks. He noticed a fading bruise along her jaw, yellowish-green with age, and his own jaw tightened at the sight. Somewhere around midnight, her eyelids began to flutter. Carson leaned forward, his own exhaustion forgotten. Her eyes opened slowly, and he found himself looking into the clearest blue he had ever seen, like the sky on a perfect summer day. "Easy now," he said softly, the way he would speak to a spooked horse. "You are safe. You are in my home out of the cold." She stared at him for a long moment, confusion and fear warring in her expression. Then her gaze darted around the room, taking in the fire, the blankets, the rough-hewn walls of his cabin. When she tried to sit up, he gently pressed her shoulder back down. "Not yet. You need to stay warm. You were nearly frozen solid when I found you at my gate. Do you remember how you got there?" Her mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. She swallowed hard, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I walked. I walked as far as I could." "From where?" Carson reached for the tin cup of warm broth he had prepared, sliding his hand behind her head to help her drink. She took small sips, and he watched her throat work as she swallowed. "Town. Lincoln." The name came out broken, and tears suddenly spilled down her cheeks. "I could not stay there anymore. I had to leave." Lincoln was 15 miles south, a hard journey on foot even in good weather. In the middle of winter, with snow falling and temperatures that could kill a man in hours, it was nearly impossible. Carson felt something twist in his chest as he looked at this fragile woman who had somehow survived that journey. "What is your name?" he asked gently. Willa Kershaw." Her eyes met his again, and he saw shame there mixed with the fear. "You should not have helped me. If my husband finds out where I am, there will be trouble." So that explained the bruise. Carson had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made anger burn hot in his gut. He kept his voice calm, though, knowing she did not need his rage right now. "Your husband is not here. You are on my land, and I decide who is welcome and who is not. You are welcome, Willa Kershaw, for as long as you need." Fresh tears spilled over, and she turned her face away from him. "You do not understand. Daniel is not the kind of man who lets go of what he considers his. He will come looking. Then he will have to deal with me." Carson set the cup aside and added another log to the fire. "But that is a problem for tomorrow. Right now, you need to rest and get your strength back. When did you last eat?" She did not answer immediately, and he realized she was trying to remember. That told him enough. He stood and moved to his small kitchen area, pulling together what he could. Beans left over from his own dinner, some bread he had baked 2 days ago, dried venison. It was not fancy, but it was hot and filling, and when he brought it to her, she ate like someone who had been hungry for a very long time. Carson watched her eat and felt something shift inside him. He had been alone on this ranch for 3 years now, ever since his engagement to Mary Ann Coulter had ended when she decided ranch life was not for her, and ran off with a banker from Helena. He had told himself he preferred the solitude, that he was content with his cattle and his land and the wide Montana sky. But seeing Willa here, wrapped in his blankets by his fire, made him realize just how empty his home had been. When she finished eating, her eyelids were already drooping again. Sleep was what she needed most now. He took the plate from her and helped her settle back into the blankets. "Rest now. We can talk more in the morning." "Where will you sleep?" she asked, her words slurring slightly with exhaustion. "I will make a pallet by the door. Do not worry about me." He had slept in far worse places, including several nights in the barn when storms had trapped him out there with laboring cattle. "Thank you," she whispered, and her hand emerged from the blankets to catch his wrist. Her fingers were warmer now, and her grip was surprisingly strong. "Thank you for saving my life." Carson looked down at her hand on his wrist and felt something stir in his chest that he had not felt in years. "You are welcome," he said quietly, and meant it more than he had meant anything in a long time. He made himself a rough bed by the door, using his coat as a pillow and a single blanket, keeping the rest on Willa. He did not mind the discomfort. The floor was hard beneath him, but he had spent enough nights on the ground during cattle drives that it barely bothered him. What bothered him was the steady awareness of her presence in his home, the soft sound of her breathing, the way the firelight caught in her hair. Carson had always been a practical man, not given to flights of fancy or romantic notions. The ranch took all his energy and most of his money, and he had long ago accepted that his life would be a solitary one. But something about finding Willa at his gate felt like fate, like the universe had dropped something precious at his doorstep and was waiting to see what he would do with it. Morning came cold and bright. Carson woke to find the fire had burned down to embers, and he quickly built it back up before checking on Willa. She was still asleep, her breathing deep and even, and the color had returned fully to her face. She looked peaceful, younger somehow, and he found himself hoping that whatever demons had driven her out into the cold were being held at bay by sleep. He moved quietly, not wanting to wake her, and went about his morning routine. The livestock needed tending, and ranch work did not stop for unexpected guests. He pulled on his heavy coat and boots, wrapped a scarf around his face, and stepped out into the bitter cold. The wind had died down overnight, but the temperature had dropped even further. His breath came out in great white clouds, and ice crystals had formed on every surface. He broke ice on the water troughs, scattered feed for the chickens, and checked on the cattle in the nearby pasture. They were hardy creatures, bred for Montana winters, but he still worried over them like children. As he worked, his mind kept drifting back to Willa and the problem she represented. He believed her when she said her husband would come looking. Men like that always did. They saw their wives as property, something to be owned and controlled, and the thought made Carson sick. His own father had treated his mother like a queen, with respect and tenderness, and Carson had always sworn he would do the same if he ever found a woman to share his life with. He was heading back to the house when he spotted horse tracks near his gate. They were fresh, probably from early this morning, and they circled the area where he had found Willa before heading back toward town. His hand instinctively moved to the rifle he carried, and his jaw tightened. Someone had been here looking. It did not take much imagination to guess who. Inside, he found Willa awake and sitting up, the blankets pulled around her shoulders like a protective cocoon. She looked better, more alert, but fear had crept back into her eyes. "I heard you leave," she said. "I did not know where you had gone. Just the morning chores. Cattle do not take days off, even for winter storms." He hung his coat by the door and moved to the fire, adding wood and stirring the coals. "How are you feeling? Warmer, sore, alive?" She managed a small smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "More than I expected to be when I left last night." "About that." Carson turned to face her, his expression serious. "There were horse tracks near my gate this morning, fresh ones. Someone was here looking around." The color drained from her face. "Daniel, most likely. Did he see you leave?" She shook her head. "I waited until he was asleep. He had been drinking, which he does most nights now, and when he finally passed out, I took what I could carry and ran. But he will have found my note by now." "You left a note?" Carson could not keep the surprise from his voice. "I wanted him to know I was leaving on purpose, that I was not coming back." Her chin lifted slightly, and he saw steel beneath her fear. "I did not want him thinking I had been taken or hurt. I wanted him to know I chose to leave him." Carson understood the impulse, but it complicated things. If she had just disappeared, Daniel Kershaw might have eventually given up the search. But a note like that, especially if he was a prideful man, would be seen as a challenge. Men had killed for less. "What kind of man is he?" Carson asked, though he suspected he already knew. Willa's hands tightened on the blankets. "The worst kind. He was charming when we met, sweet even. That was 2 years ago in Kansas. I was 17, and my father had just died, leaving me alone with debts I could not pay. Daniel offered to take care of everything, to marry me and give me a home. I thought I was lucky." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I did not know that men can wear masks until after the wedding." "He hurt you." It was not a question. Often. She touched the fading bruise on her jaw. This was from 3 weeks ago because I burned the roast. The week before that, it was because I spoke to the grocer too long. Last month, he broke my rib for smiling at his business partner. Her voice remained steady, but Carson could hear the pain beneath the words. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go. No family, no money, no friends in Lincoln who would dare cross him. Daniel owns half the businesses in town, and the sheriff is his cousin. Carson felt fury building in his chest, hot and fierce. He had met men like Daniel Kershaw before, bullies who hid their cruelty behind money and influence. You do not have to go back. You can stay here. You do not know what you are saying. He will come here. He will bring men with him, and they will not ask politely. Willa's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I will not let you get hurt because of me. When I am strong enough, I will leave and head somewhere he cannot find me. You will freeze or starve before you make it another 15 miles. Carson moved closer, crouching down so they were at eye level. I am not afraid of your husband, Willa. This is my land, and out here property rights mean something. The law is on my side if he tries to cause trouble. The law does not care about women like me. Maybe not in town. But this is different. You are not his property anymore. You left him, and that makes you your own person. And as far as anyone knows, you are an acquaintance who needed help during a storm. There is nothing illegal about that. She studied his face for a long moment, and he could see her weighing her options. Why are you helping me? You do not even know me. Carson could have given her a dozen practical reasons. He could have talked about basic human decency or Christian duty. But sitting here, looking into those clear blue eyes, he found himself telling her the truth. Because when I found you at my gate, half frozen and still fighting to survive, something in me recognized something in you. I have been alone on this ranch for 3 years, telling myself I was content with solitude. But the moment I carried you into this house, it stopped feeling empty. Maybe that makes me a fool, but I am not going to turn my back on you now. Willa's breath caught and a single tear spilled down her cheek. I do not know what to say. Say you will stay, at least until spring. Give yourself time to heal and figure out what you want to do next. I have room, and I could use help around the ranch if you are willing. Nothing improper, he added quickly, seeing her expression. You would have your own space and we would keep things respectable. I just think you deserve a chance to rest without fear. She was quiet for so long that Carson thought she might refuse, but finally she nodded. Until spring. But the moment Daniel causes you trouble, I leave. I will not have your blood on my conscience. Fair enough. He stood and offered her his hand. Now, are you steady enough to walk? I can set up a proper bed for you in the other room. She took his hand and let him help her to her feet. The blankets fell away, and Carson quickly averted his eyes, remembering that her own clothes were still drying by the fire. She clutched the bearskin around herself like a robe, and he could see her cheeks flush with embarrassment. I am sorry about your clothes, he said, keeping his gaze firmly on the wall. They should be dry soon. In the meantime, I can find you something of mine to wear. It will not fit right, but it will be warm. Thank you. Her voice was quiet, grateful. Carson went to his room and pulled out his smallest shirt and a pair of trousers, along with a belt to keep them up. When he emerged, Willa had settled herself on the chair by the fire, still wrapped in the bearskin. He handed her the clothes without looking at her directly. I will be outside for a while. Take your time. He grabbed his coat and escaped into the cold, his heart pounding harder than it should have been. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Willa proved to be stronger than she looked, insisting on helping around the house despite Carson's protests that she should rest. She cooked meals that were far better than anything he had managed on his own. mended the tears in his shirts that he had been ignoring for months, and brought a kind of warmth to the cabin that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. They talked while they worked, sharing pieces of their lives like people getting to know each other. Carson told her about growing up on this land, about his father's decision to head west and leave the ranch to him, about Mary Ann and the engagement that had ended in heartbreak. Willa spoke carefully about her childhood in Kansas, about losing her mother young and raising herself while her father drank away his grief. She talked about the hope she had felt when Daniel proposed, and the slow death of that hope as his true nature revealed itself. "The worst part was not the hitting," she said one evening as they sat by the fire after dinner. "It was the way he made me feel like I deserved it, like I was so fundamentally broken and worthless that I should be grateful he kept me at all." Carson looked at her across the firelight, at the strength in her jaw and the intelligence in her eyes, and felt anger burn fresh in his chest. "You know that is not true." "I do now. But when you hear something often enough, it starts to feel like truth." She poked at the fire with an iron poker, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. "Leaving was the hardest thing I have ever done. Every step away from that house, I was certain I was making a terrible mistake, that I would freeze to death and prove him right about how useless I was. But you did not freeze, you survived, and you made it to my gate, which takes more strength than most people have." Carson hesitated, then added, "You are one of the bravest people I have ever met." She looked up at him, surprise clear on her face. "I do not feel brave. Brave people rarely do. They just keep moving forward even when they are terrified." He thought about his own father, heading west at 60 years old with nothing but a horse and a dream. That is what courage really is. Willa smiled then, a real smile that lit up her whole face, and Carson felt his heart stutter in his chest. He was in trouble, he realized. Somewhere in the past few days, this woman he had found freezing at his gate had worked her way into his heart, and he did not know what to do about it. The problem came a week after Willa arrived, on a morning that dawned clear and cold. Carson was in the barn, mucking out stalls, when he heard the sound of horses approaching. He grabbed his rifle and stepped outside to find 5 men on horseback riding up to his house. The man in front was tall and well-dressed, with dark hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty in his eyes. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Carson kept his voice level, but his finger rested near the trigger of his rifle. The dark-haired man smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "I am looking for my wife. I have reason to believe she might have come this way. I am alone here except for the livestock." Carson's heart pounded, but he kept his expression neutral. Ranch work does not leave much time for company. "Is that right?" Daniel Kershaw, for it could be no one else, dismounted and walked toward Carson with the easy confidence of a man used to getting his way. "Because I tracked her footprints through the snow, and they led right to your gate. Now, I understand you might be trying to protect her, but Willa is my wife. She belongs with me." "Nobody belongs to anybody." Carson's voice hardened. "And if a woman did come here seeking shelter, which I am not saying happened, I would not turn her over to a man who beats her." Daniel's face darkened. "What goes on between a man and his wife is none of your concern. It is when it happens on my land." Carson raised his rifle slightly, not quite pointing it but making his intent clear. "I think you should leave now." The 4 men with Daniel shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward their guns. Carson calculated the odds and did not like them. He was a decent shot, but 5 against 1 was suicide. Before things could escalate, the door to his house opened and Willa stepped out. "Do not." Her voice rang clear across the yard. She had dressed in her own clothes, now clean and mended, and she stood straight despite the fear Carson could see in her eyes. "Do not hurt him because of me, Willa." Daniel's voice changed, becoming softer, almost gentle. It was the voice of the charming man he had been when they met, and Carson's stomach turned at how easily he could switch masks. "Come now, darling. You have had your little adventure. It is time to come home." "No." She walked forward until she stood beside Carson, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I am not coming back, Daniel. I told you in my note. The marriage is over. You do not get to decide that." The gentleness vanished, replaced by ice. "You are my wife before God and the law. You took vows. Vows you broke every time you raised your hand to me." Willa's voice shook but held firm. "I am staying here. Mr. Irving has offered me employment as his housekeeper, which is entirely proper and legal. You have no claim on me anymore." Carson glanced at her, surprised by the lie but understanding the strategy. Employment was different than simply taking shelter. It gave her a legitimate reason to be there. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Is that true, Irving? You hired my wife." "I did." Carson hoped his voice did not betray the lie. "Good housekeepers are hard to find out here, and Mrs. Kershaw needed work. It is a business arrangement, nothing more." "I do not believe you." Daniel took another step forward. "I think you are sheltering a runaway wife, which makes you complicit in breaking the sanctity of marriage." "The law will see it that way too. The law also says a woman has the right to seek employment." Carson kept his rifle steady. "And if you try to take her by force, that is kidnapping, which I will defend against. Now I have asked you politely to leave my property. I will not ask again." For a long moment, the tension hung heavy in the air. Carson could feel Willa trembling beside him, and he wanted nothing more than to pull her behind him, to shield her from Daniel's poisonous gaze. But he knew that would only make things worse. Finally, Daniel smiled again, that cold, empty expression that never reached his eyes. "Fine. Keep her for now. But this is not over, Irving. I have friends in Lincoln, and they will be very interested to hear about this situation. You might find your business dealings become more difficult. A rancher needs good relationships with the town, after all. I will take my chances." Carson did not lower his rifle until Daniel and his men had mounted their horses and ridden away. Even then, he kept it close as he turned to Willa. She was pale, her whole body shaking now that the confrontation was over. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I should not have come out. I just could not let him hurt you. You did the right thing. That quick thinking about employment probably saved us both." He wanted to reach out and comfort her but kept his hands to himself. "Are you all right? I knew he would come. I knew it, but seeing him again." She wrapped her arms around herself. "For a moment I almost believed him." When he used that soft voice, the one that makes you think maybe this time will be different. It never is with men like that. Carson finally set the rifle aside and let himself touch her shoulder just briefly. "Come inside. You are freezing." They went back into the house, and Carson locked the door behind them, something he rarely bothered to do. Willa collapsed into the chair by the fire, and he saw her hands shaking as she held them out to the flames. "He will make trouble for you," she said quietly. "Everything he said about his connections in Lincoln is true. He can make your life very difficult." "I do not care." Carson crouched in front of her, forcing her to look at him. "Listen to me. I do not care what he does or who he knows. You are staying here, and that is final. We will deal with whatever comes." "Why?" Her voice broke. "Why would you risk everything for me?" Carson opened his mouth to give her a practical answer, something about duty or kindness. But looking into her eyes, he found himself saying something else entirely. "Because in the week you have been here, I have felt more alive than I have in 3 years. Because when I come in from the cold and smell food cooking and see you here, my whole world makes sense in a way it never did before. Because I think I am falling in love with you, Willa Kershaw, and the thought of him taking you back to that life makes me want to tear the world apart with my bare hands." The silence that followed was deafening. Willa stared at him, her eyes wide with shock, and Carson felt his face heat. He had not meant to say all that, had not even fully admitted it to himself until the words were already out. Now they hung between them, impossible to take back. "You barely know me," she finally whispered. "I know enough. I know you are kind and strong and brave. I know you make the best coffee I have ever tasted, and that you hum when you think no one is listening. I know you deserve better than what life has given you so far." He stood up, suddenly needing distance, and moved to the window. "I am sorry. That was inappropriate. You do not need me dumping my feelings on you when you are still recovering from everything you have been through." He heard her stand, heard her footsteps crossing the wooden floor. Then her hand touched his arm, gentle and tentative. "Carson." She said his name like it mattered, like it meant something. "Look at me." He turned, and she was right there, close enough that he could see the flecks of silver in her blue eyes. Her hand moved from his arm to his chest, resting over his heart. "I am terrified," she said. "Terrified of Daniel. Terrified of what happens next. Terrified of these feelings I am starting to have for you. But underneath all that fear, there is something else. Something warm and hopeful that I thought he had beaten out of me years ago. When I am with you, I remember what it feels like to be treated like a person instead of a possession. You make me feel safe, and I have not felt safe in so long, Willa." Her name came out rough, and he could not help himself anymore. He cupped her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs brushing her cheeks. "I know the timing is terrible. I know you need time to heal. But I need you to know that I am here, and I am not going anywhere, and whenever you are ready, if you are ever ready, I will be waiting." She leaned into his touch, her eyes falling closed. "What if I am never ready? What if he broke something in me that cannot be fixed? Then I will wait anyway, and I will help you pick up the pieces however long it takes." He hesitated, then added, "But for what it is worth, I do not think you are broken. I think you are healing, and that takes time." She opened her eyes and looked at him with such raw emotion that his breath caught. Then, slowly, she rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. It was barely a kiss, just the softest brush of contact, but it sent electricity shooting through his entire body. He held himself perfectly still, afraid to move, afraid to do anything that might startle her. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed. "I am not ready for more than that." "Not yet, but I wanted you to know that I feel it too, this thing between us, and maybe with time we can figure out what it means. Take all the time you need." Carson forced himself to step back to give her space. "We have until spring, remember?" She smiled, and it was like the sun coming out. Until spring. The weeks that followed were both the easiest and the hardest of Carson's life. Easy because having Willa there made everything better. She brought life and laughter to his home, and they fell into a comfortable partnership. They cooked together, worked together, spent long evenings talking by the fire. She was brilliant and funny, and every day he discovered something new to love about her. Hard because wanting her and not having her was a special kind of torture. He saw the way she looked at him sometimes, saw the longing in her eyes that matched his own. But he also saw the way she flinched from sudden movements, the way she checked the windows compulsively, the way nightmares sometimes woke her in the middle of the night. She was healing, but healing was not a straight line, and he would not rush her. Daniel made good on his threats. The next time Carson went into Lincoln to sell cattle, he found that the usual buyers had suddenly lost interest. The feed store charged him double what they normally did, and the bank informed him that his loan payment had mysteriously been moved up. It was petty harassment, but it added up, and Carson knew it was only going to get worse. He did not tell Willa about most of it. She noticed some things, though, like when he came back from town with only half the supplies they needed, because that was all he could afford at the inflated prices. "This is because of me," she said, looking at the meager pile of goods on the kitchen table. "He is punishing you. He is being a petty bully, which is what men like him do when they do not get their way." Carson put the supplies away with determined cheerfulness. "It is fine. We have enough to get through the winter, and by spring this will all blow over. Or by spring you will be ruined." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "Let me leave. I can go to Helena, or even further, I can find work somewhere and he will stop making your life difficult." "No," Carson's voice was firm. "Running again is not the answer. Besides, where would you go? How would you support yourself? You do not have money or references, and women alone in this territory face dangers you cannot imagine. I faced those dangers getting here." But her voice lacked conviction, and he could see the fear lurking beneath her words. "You were lucky. Incredibly, impossibly lucky." He moved closer, taking her hands in his. "I am not letting you throw yourself back out into the world alone. We will figure this out together." She looked down at their joined hands, and he saw a tear slide down her cheek. "I do not deserve you. That is the thing Daniel told you, not the truth." He tilted her chin up gently. "You deserve everything good in this world, Willa, and I am going to spend however long it takes proving that to you." She kissed him then, longer and deeper than that first tentative brush of lips. Carson wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, and for a moment the rest of the world fell away. There was only the two of them, the heat between them, the perfect rightness of her in his arms. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Willa rested her forehead against his chest. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me. Me too." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. But sometimes the best things are the scariest. Winter deepened, and the world outside became a frozen wasteland. Carson was grateful for the isolation now. The snow made it nearly impossible for anyone to reach the ranch, which meant Daniel could not cause more trouble even if he wanted to. It also meant Carson and Willa were truly alone together, cut off from the rest of the world, and in that isolation, something beautiful grew. They talked about everything. Willa told him about her dreams of opening a bakery someday, of creating beautiful cakes and pastries that brought joy to people. Carson told her about his plans to expand the ranch, to build a bigger house, and maybe start raising horses in addition to cattle. They were careful not to talk too much about the future, not to make promises they might not be able to keep. But the dreams hung between them anyway, tantalizing and almost within reach. One night, as a blizzard howled outside, they sat together on the rug in front of the fire. Willa had been teaching Carson to play cards, and he was getting better, though she still won most hands. They had long since given up on the pretense of her sleeping in the other room. Every night she made a pallet by the fire, and every night Carson lay awake on his own bed, hyper-aware of her presence just a room away. "Tell me something you have never told anyone else," Willa said suddenly, setting down her cards. Carson considered the question. "When I was 8, I found a wolf pup in the woods. Its mother had been killed by hunters and it was starving. I knew my father would never let me keep it, so I hid it in the barn and fed it scraps from my dinner every night. What happened to it? After about a month, my father found out. I thought he would be furious, but instead he sat me down and explained that wild things need to be wild, that keeping the wolf was not kindness but cruelty, even if I loved it." Carson smiled at the memory. "We took it deeper into the mountains and let it go. My father said if it was meant to survive, it would find its way, and if not, at least it would die free." Willa was quiet for a moment. "Did it survive? I do not know, but I like to think it did. I like to think it found a pack and lived a good life." He picked up his cards again, then set them down. Your turn, tell me something. She bit her lip, thinking. I can sing. Really sing, I mean. My mother had a beautiful voice and she taught me before she died. I used to dream of singing in a proper theater, wearing a beautiful dress, with people listening like what I had to say mattered. Why did you stop? Daniel said I sounded like a cat in heat. Her voice was matter of fact, but Carson could hear the hurt beneath it. After the first time he said it, I never sang around him again. Anger flared in Carson's chest, but he pushed it down. Sing something now. She looked at him, startled. What? Sing something. Anything. I want to hear you. He leaned back against the chair behind him, giving her his full attention. Please. Willa hesitated, and he could see the fear and hope warring in her expression. Then, slowly, she opened her mouth and began to sing. It was an old hymn, something about grace and redemption, and her voice was nothing short of beautiful. Rich and pure and full of emotion, it filled the small cabin and seemed to make the very walls glow with warmth. When she finished, Carson could not speak for a moment. His throat was tight with emotion, and he realized he had tears in his eyes. Willa, he finally managed. That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard, she smiled, but tears were running down her own cheeks. Really, really. You should sing every day. You should sing so the whole world can hear you. He moved closer, taking her hands. Promise me you will never let anyone make you feel like your voice does not matter again. I promise. She leaned forward and kissed him, and this time when they broke apart, neither of them pulled away completely. They stayed close, breathing the same air, and Carson felt the last of his restraint beginning to crack. I want you to stay, he said quietly. Not just until spring. Forever. I want you to be my wife, Willa. I want to build a life with you here on this land, with your singing filling the house and your laughter making everything bright. I know it is too soon. I know you are still healing and figuring things out, but I needed you to know what I want, what I am hoping for. Willa's breath hitched. I am still married to Daniel. In the eyes of the law, I am still his wife. Then we will get you a divorce. It can be done, especially with evidence of abuse. It will take time and money, but it can be done. Carson cupped her face in his hands. I am not asking you to decide tonight. I am just telling you what I want so you know, so there is no confusion about where my heart is. I want that too, she whispered. I want it so much it scares me. But what if Daniel will not agree to a divorce? What if he fights it and makes everything ugly? Then we fight back, together. Carson pressed his forehead to hers. I am not afraid of him, Willa, and you do not have to be either. Not anymore. She kissed him again, and this time the kiss deepened, became something more. Carson felt her hands on his chest, felt her pressing closer, and every nerve in his body came alive. He kissed her back with all the longing he had been holding inside, and when she made a soft sound in the back of her throat, he almost lost control entirely. But he pulled back, breathing hard. Not yet. Not until you are sure. Not until you are healed enough that being with me is what you truly want, not just a reaction to everything you have been through. Willa looked at him with such love in her eyes that his heart stuttered. How are you real? I ask myself the same thing about you every day. He stood up and offered her his hand. Come on. It is late and morning comes early on a ranch. She let him help her up, but before she went to her pallet, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. Thank you for being patient with me. Always, he promised, and meant it with everything he had. The blizzard lasted 3 days, and by the time it cleared, the ranch was buried under 4 feet of snow. Carson spent a week digging out, making paths to the barn and the other outbuildings, checking on the cattle who had huddled together in the sheltered areas. 2 of the older cows had not made it, which hurt but was not unexpected. Winter was hard on livestock, and he would count himself lucky if he did not lose more before spring. Willa helped him however she could. bringing hot coffee out to the barn, keeping the house warm, making sure he ate properly even when he was too tired to care. She was a partner in every sense of the word, and Carson fell more in love with her every day. It was late February when the thaw finally started. The snow began to melt, turning the world into a muddy mess, and with the thaw came visitors. Carson was repairing a fence post when he saw two riders approaching. He tensed, one hand moving to the rifle he now carried everywhere, but relaxed slightly when he recognized one of them. Sheriff Dalton. Carson nodded to the lawman from Lincoln, a grizzled man in his 50s with more gray in his beard than brown. The man with him was younger, wearing a badge that marked him as a deputy. "What brings you all the way out here, Mr. Irving?" The sheriff did not dismount, and his expression was neutral. "I have had a complaint filed. Daniel Kershaw claims you are harboring his wife against her will." "That is not true, and you know it." Carson kept his voice level. "Mrs. Kershaw is here as my housekeeper. She is a grown woman, free to make her own choices. Be that as it may, I need to speak with her, make sure she is all right." The sheriff finally dismounted, and his deputy followed suit. "This does not have to be difficult, Irving. Just let me talk to her." Carson hesitated. He did not trust Sheriff Dalton, who was Daniel's cousin, but refusing to let him speak to Willa would only make things worse. "Fine, but I am staying with her." They walked to the house, and Carson found Willa in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread. She looked up when they entered, and he saw the color drain from her face when she recognized the sheriff. "Mrs. Kershaw." Dalton removed his hat respectfully. "I am here to make sure you are all right. Your husband is worried about you." "My husband is the reason I left." Willa's voice was steady, but Carson could see her hands trembling. She wiped the flour from them on her apron and lifted her chin. "I am here of my own free will, Sheriff. Mr. Irving has been nothing but kind and respectful. Even so, you are still a married woman. Your place is with your husband." The sheriff's tone was gentle but firm. "Now, why do you not pack your things and we will escort you back to town?" "No." Willa's voice rang clear. "I am not going back to Daniel, Sheriff. He hurt me repeatedly during our marriage. I have bruises that have not even fully healed yet. You cannot force me to return to a man who beats me." Dalton sighed. "Domestic matters are complicated, Mrs. Kershaw. What happens between a man and wife in their home is not really the law's concern. So if he kills me, you will care then? Or will that also be a domestic matter?" Willa's voice rose, and Carson saw fury replacing her fear. "I am a human being, Sheriff. I have the right to protect myself from harm." "She has employment here," Carson interjected. "There is nothing illegal about that. And if you try to take her by force, I will fight you." The deputy's hand moved to his gun, but Sheriff Dalton held up a hand. "Nobody is fighting anyone. Irving, you seem like a decent man, but you are putting yourself in the middle of a marriage dispute which never ends well. Mrs. Kershaw, I am giving you one more chance. Come back to town peacefully, work things out with your husband like adults, and this all goes away. And if I refuse, then Mr. Kershaw has indicated he will pursue legal action. Alienation of affection, maybe even adultery charges if he can prove anything improper happened here." The sheriff looked genuinely regretful. "You do not want that kind of trouble, madam. Neither of you do." Carson felt cold fury settle in his chest. "You are threatening us." "I am telling you how things stand. Daniel Kershaw is a powerful man in Lincoln, and he wants his wife back. You two can make this easy or hard, but either way, he is not giving up." Dalton put his hat back on. "I will give you a week to think it over. After that, I will be back with a court order if necessary." When they left, Willa collapsed into a chair, her whole body shaking. Carson locked the door behind them and went to her, pulling her into his arms. "It is all right, we will figure this out." How? He has the law on his side. He has money and power and connections. What do we have? She was crying now, and Carson's heart broke at the despair in her voice. We have the truth, and we have each other. He stroked her hair, holding her close. Listen to me. I am not letting him take you. I do not care what he says or what court orders he gets. You are staying here. He will destroy you. She pulled back to look at him, her eyes red and swollen. Is that what you want, to lose everything because of me? I already lost everything once when Mary Ann left. I survived that, and I will survive this. But I will not survive losing you, Willa, not now, not when I finally found something worth fighting for. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. We are going to beat him. I do not know how yet, but we will. She clung to him, and they stood there in the kitchen for a long time, holding each other like lifelines in a storm. The next day, Carson rode into Lincoln with Willa beside him. She had been terrified to go back, but they both knew they needed help, and there was only one person in town who might be willing to give it. Jonas McAllister was a lawyer who had set up practice in Lincoln 5 years ago, and he had a reputation for being honest, which was rare in these parts. His office was above the general store, and they climbed the narrow stairs with Carson's hand protectively on Willa's back. McAllister was a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, and he looked surprised to see them. "Mr. Irving, is it not? What can I do for you?" His eyes moved to Willa, and Carson saw recognition dawn. "Ah, I think I can guess why you are here. Can you help us?" Carson got straight to the point. "Mrs. Kershaw wants a divorce from Daniel Kershaw, and he is fighting it with everything he has." McAllister gestured for them to sit, and he listened carefully as Willa told her story. When she got to the parts about the violence, the lawyer's expression darkened. "This is bad," he said when she finished. "Not because you do not have a case. You do, and a strong one. But Daniel Kershaw is not going to let his wife divorce him without a fight. It will be ugly." "How ugly?" Carson asked. "He will drag your name through the mud, Mrs. Kershaw. He will claim adultery, immorality, anything he can think of to make you look bad. And you, Mr. Irving, will be accused of seducing another man's wife. It could ruin both of you socially." McAllister leaned back in his chair. "But if you are willing to endure that, I think we can win." "We are willing." Carson took Willa's hand. "What do we need to do?" "First, we document everything. Every bruise, every incident you can remember, every witness who might have seen something. Then we file for divorce on the grounds of cruelty and abuse. Montana territory allows for that, even if it is not common." McAllister pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. "This will take time and money. Are you prepared for that?" "Whatever it takes," Carson said firmly. They spent the next 2 hours going through every detail of Willa's marriage. It was painful, and more than once she had to stop and compose herself. But she pushed through, and by the end, they had a solid foundation for a case. As they were leaving, McAllister called after them. "One more thing, be careful. Men like Kershaw do not like losing, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. Watch your backs." The words proved prophetic. A week later, Carson woke in the middle of the night to the smell of smoke. He bolted out of bed and ran into the main room to find flames licking up the side of the house near the kitchen. Willa was already awake, her eyes wide with terror. "Fire!" Carson grabbed blankets and began beating at the flames while Willa ran for water. It took nearly an hour to get the fire under control, and by then, one whole wall of the kitchen was charred black. If Carson had not woken when he did, the whole house would have gone up. In the morning light, he found evidence that the fire had been set deliberately. Someone had piled kindling against the side of the house and lit it. The message was clear: "Leave town, or next time they would not be so lucky." "He is trying to kill us," Willa said, her voice shaking as she stared at the burned wall. Daniel is trying to kill us. No, he is trying to scare us into giving up. Carson pulled her away from the damage, and it is not going to work. We are filing those divorce papers today, and we are moving forward. But as he said the words, Carson felt real fear for the first time. He could handle a lot of things, but he could not protect Willa if Daniel decided to escalate further. And the thought of something happening to her made his blood run cold. They filed the papers with McAllister that afternoon, and by evening, the whole town knew. Carson felt the stares and whispers as they walked through Lincoln, saw the way people pulled their children away from Willa like she was diseased. It was exactly what McAllister had warned about, but knowing it was coming did not make it easier to endure. Daniel's response came 2 days later in the form of a lawsuit. He was suing Carson for alienation of affection, claiming that Carson had deliberately seduced his wife and destroyed their marriage. The amount he was asking for was astronomical, more than the ranch was worth, and Carson knew that was the point. Even if he won the case, the legal fees would bankrupt him. "I cannot let you lose everything for me," Willa said that night. They sat by the fire, the damaged kitchen a constant reminder of the danger they faced. "There has to be another way." "There is not. We push forward or we give up. Those are our only choices." Carson took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I choose to push forward. Even if it means losing the ranch, even then. I can build another ranch somewhere else, but I cannot replace you." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "You are worth more than any piece of land, Willa." She was crying again, but this time when she kissed him, there was something different in it. A desperation, a need that matched his own. "I do not want to wait any more," she whispered against his lips. "I do not want to be afraid anymore. I want to be with you completely. I want one night where we do not worry about Daniel or lawsuits or fires, just us." Carson pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. I want this. I want you." Her hands moved to his shirt, fingers trembling slightly as she began to unbutton it. "Make me forget everything but this, just for tonight." He did not need to be told twice. Carson kissed her deeply, pouring 3 months of longing and love into it. They moved together to his bedroom, shedding clothes and barriers, and when he finally made love to her, it was with a gentleness and reverence that brought tears to both their eyes. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed, and Willa traced patterns on his chest with her fingertips. "I love you," she said softly. "I know I have said it before, but I need you to really hear it. I love you, Carson Irving. You saved my life in more ways than one. I love you too." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Whatever happens next, we face it together." "I promise." "Together," she echoed, and for the first time in months, Carson felt something like hope. The court date was set for early May, and as spring bloomed across Montana, Carson and Willa prepared for the fight of their lives. McAllister worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and witness statements. They found the doctor who had treated Willa twice for broken bones, both times at Daniel's hand, though he had claimed they were accidents. They found neighbors who had heard screaming from the Kershaw house late at night. They built a case that was ironclad, but they all knew that sometimes the truth did not matter as much as who had the most money. The night before the trial, Willa could not sleep. She paced the house, her anxiety palpable, and Carson finally got up and wrapped her in his arms. "What if we lose?" she asked. "What if the judge sides with Daniel and says I have to go back? Then we leave Montana. We go somewhere he cannot find us and start over." Carson had already thought through this scenario a dozen times. "I have some money saved, enough to buy land somewhere else. Wyoming, maybe, or even Oregon. We disappear and build a new life, running forever." She sounded so tired, No, running once more to somewhere safe and then building something permanent together. He tilted her chin up so she had to look at him. I will go to the ends of the earth with you, Willa. Distance does not scare me. Only losing you scares me. She kissed him then, long and slow, and when she finally pulled back, some of the fear had left her eyes. No matter what happens tomorrow, thank you for giving me a reason to keep fighting. Always, he promised. The courthouse in Lincoln was packed the next morning. It seemed like the whole town had turned out to watch the spectacle, and Carson felt their eyes on him and Willa as they walked in. Daniel sat at the front with his own lawyer, a slick man from Helena who probably cost more per hour than Carson made in a month. When Daniel saw Willa, his expression hardened, and Carson instinctively moved closer to her. Judge Morrison was an older man, weathered and serious, and he called the court to order with a bang of his gavel. The next several hours were brutal. Daniel's lawyer painted Willa as a wayward wife who had abandoned her vows and taken up with another man. He suggested that Carson had seduced her, that she was too weak-willed to resist his advances, that her claims of abuse were fabrications designed to justify her infidelity. Carson wanted to stand up and call it all lies, but McAllister kept a firm hand on his arm. "Let me do my job," the lawyer whispered. When it was their turn, McAllister systematically destroyed Daniel's case. He presented medical records showing Willa's injuries. He called the neighbors who testified to hearing screams and seeing bruises. He even got the doctor to admit that the injuries he had treated were consistent with violence, not accidents. And then he put Willa on the stand. She was terrified. Carson could see that, but she held her head high as she told her story. She spoke clearly about the escalating violence, about the fear that had consumed her life, about the night she had finally fled into the snow because death from cold seemed preferable to death at her husband's hands. There was not a dry eye in the courtroom when she finished, and even Judge Morrison looked moved. Daniel took the stand and tried to defend himself, claiming Willa was exaggerating, that she was emotional and prone to dramatics. But under McAllister's cross-examination, his story fell apart. He contradicted himself multiple times, and his barely contained rage showed through whenever Willa's name was mentioned. By the end, even people who had come in sympathetic to Daniel were looking at him with suspicion. Judge Morrison called for a recess and disappeared into his chambers. The waiting was agony. Carson held Willa's hand, feeling it shake in his, and prayed to a God he was not sure he believed in anymore. Please, he thought, please let us win this. 2 hours later, the judge returned. The courtroom fell silent as he took his seat and shuffled through his papers. Finally, he looked up. I have heard all the evidence presented today, and I have reached a decision. Mrs. Willa Kershaw has proven, to my satisfaction, that her husband Daniel Kershaw subjected her to physical violence and cruelty throughout their marriage. Montana territory law allows for divorce on such grounds, and I am granting her petition. The marriage between Willa Kershaw and Daniel Kershaw is hereby dissolved. The courtroom erupted. Carson pulled Willa into his arms as she sobbed with relief. People were shouting, some in approval, some in outrage. Daniel was on his feet, his face purple with rage, screaming something at the judge that Carson could not make out over the noise. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, banging his gavel for order, I am dismissing Daniel Kershaw's lawsuit against Carson Irving. There is no evidence of alienation of affection when the affection in question was already destroyed by Mr. Kershaw's own actions. This court is adjourned. They had won. Against all odds, they had actually won. Carson felt dizzy with relief as McAllister shook his hand and congratulated them. People crowded around, some offering support, others just wanting to be part of the drama. In the chaos, Carson caught sight of Daniel standing alone, his lawyer already gone. The look on Daniel's face was pure hatred, and Carson felt a chill run down his spine. "Let's go home," he said to Willa, and she nodded gratefully. They rode back to the ranch in silence, both too emotionally exhausted for words. The sun was setting as they arrived, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and for the first time in months, Carson let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they were finally safe. That night, they celebrated quietly with a good meal and a bottle of whiskey Carson had been saving for a special occasion. Willa sang for him, her voice filling the house with joy, and Carson felt his heart overflow with love for this brave, beautiful woman. "Marry me," he said suddenly, interrupting her song. "I know we have only been free from Daniel for a few hours, but I do not want to wait any more. Marry me, Willa, be my wife for real this time." She laughed, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, of course, yes." He kissed her then, long and deep, and when they finally made it to bed that night, they made love with a freedom and joy that neither had felt before. This was what it was supposed to be like, Carson thought as he held her close afterward. Love without fear, touch without pain. This was what they both deserved. They were married a month later in a small ceremony at the ranch. McAllister served as witness along with two of Carson's ranch hands, and a traveling preacher performed the service. Willa wore a simple dress she had sewn herself, and Carson wore his best suit, and when they exchanged vows under the wide Montana sky, both of them cried. The months that followed were the happiest of Carson's life. They worked the ranch together, building it up into something bigger and better. Willa started a small bakery business, selling her cakes and bread in town, and her talent quickly became legendary. People who had shunned her during the trial came back, sheepish and apologetic, drawn by the smell of her baking and the warmth of her smile. Daniel left Lincoln shortly after the divorce, and rumor had it he had gone to California. Carson did not care where he went as long as it was far away from Willa. The burned section of the house was repaired and improved, and Carson even added on a second bedroom, thinking ahead to a future he had not dared dream about before. In October, Willa told him she was pregnant. They had been sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is a baby," she said softly. "Our baby." Carson felt his world tilt and realign around this new truth. A baby. Their baby. He pulled Willa into his arms and held her tight, overwhelmed with emotion. "Are you happy?" he managed to ask. "Happier than I ever thought possible." She was crying and laughing at the same time. "I am going to be a mother, Carson. We are going to be parents." "We are going to be amazing parents," he corrected, kissing her deeply. "Our child will grow up knowing nothing but love and safety. I promise you that." And he kept that promise. The following summer, Willa gave birth to a healthy boy with his mother's blue eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Carson's father, and from the moment Carson held his son for the first time, he knew that every hard thing they had endured had been worth it for this moment. Thomas was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Rose, who had Willa's honey-colored hair and a temperament as sweet as her name. And 3 years after that came another boy, Benjamin, who was born laughing and never seemed to stop. The ranch prospered as the years passed. Carson expanded into horse breeding as he had always dreamed, and Willa's bakery became famous throughout Montana territory. They built a bigger house to accommodate their growing family, with a real kitchen for Willa's baking and enough bedrooms for all the children plus guests. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Carson and Willa stood on the porch of their beautiful home, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 12 now, helping his father with the horses. Rose was 10, already showing signs of inheriting her mother's talent for baking. And Benjamin, at 7, was a wild child who kept them all on their toes. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" Willa asked, leaning into Carson's side. "Sometimes I think about that night you found me at your gate and it feels like a lifetime ago. Other times it feels like yesterday." "I remember every detail," Carson said, wrapping his arm around her waist. "You were so cold, so fragile. I was terrified you would not make it through the night. But I did, because you saved me." She turned to look up at him, and he saw the same love in her eyes that he felt in his heart. "You gave me everything, Carson. A home, a family, a life worth living. I cannot imagine what would have happened if you had not found me that night. You would have survived somehow. You are the strongest person I know." He kissed her forehead. "But I am glad I found you. You changed my life, Willa. You took a lonely rancher and gave him a reason to wake up smiling every morning. We saved each other," she said softly. "That is what love does." They stood there together, watching the sun set over the Montana mountains they both loved, surrounded by the life they had built together. It had not been easy. They had faced opposition, violence, legal battles, and more hardships than most couples endure in a lifetime. But they had faced it all together, and that had made all the difference. Thomas came running up then, followed by his siblings. "Papa, Mama, come see. One of the mares is about to foal." They went together as a family to witness the birth of new life, and Carson felt his heart swell with gratitude. This was everything he had ever wanted and more than he had dared hope for. A home filled with love and laughter. A wife who was his partner in every sense of the word. Children who would grow up knowing they were cherished. Land that stretched as far as the eye could see, all of it theirs through hard work and determination. That night, after the children were asleep, and the new foal was safely nestled with its mother in the barn, Carson and Willa lay in bed together. They had made love slowly, tenderly, with the familiarity of a decade together, but still with the passion that had ignited that first winter. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not left Daniel?" Willa asked, her head resting on Carson's chest. "If I had stayed and just endured it?" "I try not to think about that." Carson's arm tightened around her. "But if you had not left, I would still be alone in that empty house, going through the motions of living without really being alive. You gave me purpose, Willa. You made me whole. You did the same for me." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "I hope our children never have to fight as hard as we did for their happiness. I hope they grow up knowing they deserve love and respect, that they never settle for anything less. We will teach them that, by example and by our words." Carson kissed the top of her head. "They will grow up strong and sure, knowing exactly what real love looks like." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, the birth of 2 more children, the deaths of beloved horses and cattle, the evolution of Montana from territory to state. Through it all, Carson and Willa stood together, their love only deepening with time. When Carson was 50 and Willa was 47, they celebrated their silver anniversary with all their children and grandchildren gathered around. Thomas had married a local girl and taken over much of the ranch operations. Rose had opened her own bakery in Lincoln, carrying on her mother's legacy. Benjamin had become a veterinarian, the first in the family to attend university. Their 2 younger children, Emma and Samuel, were still living at home, though both were nearly grown. As Carson looked around at the family they had created, at the legacy of love they were leaving behind, he felt a profound sense of peace. The scared, lonely rancher who had found a freezing woman at his gate all those years ago was gone, replaced by a man who knew the true meaning of richness had nothing to do with money or land. "Thank you," Willa whispered to him that night as they danced together while their family cheered them on. "For choosing me, for saving me, for loving me all these years." "Thank you for letting me," Carson replied, pulling her closer. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Willa Irving, then, now, and always." They kissed then, surrounded by the people they loved most in the world, and Carson felt grateful for every moment that had led them to this place. The fire that had warmed Willa's body that first cold night had kindled something far more powerful, a love that had endured and would continue to endure for all the years they had left. That night, lying in bed with Willa asleep beside him, Carson thought back to that fateful evening when a winter storm had blown a miracle to his doorstep. He had been so alone then, so resigned to a life of solitude. Finding Willa had changed everything, had given his life meaning and purpose beyond just surviving. He looked at her now, her hair silver threaded with gold in the moonlight, her face peaceful in sleep. She was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, still the bravest person he knew. Every day with her was a gift, and he never took a single moment for granted. "I love you," he whispered, knowing she could not hear him but needing to say it anyway. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." As if sensing his words in her sleep, Willa smiled and moved closer, tucking herself against his side the way she had done every night for 30 years. Carson wrapped his arms around her and closed his eyes, feeling more content than any man had a right to be. Outside, the Montana wind howled across the plains, the same wind that had nearly killed Willa all those years ago. But inside their home, there was only warmth and love and the quiet breathing of two souls who had found each other against all odds. The lonely rancher had found his freezing woman at the gate, had warmed her by his fire and in his heart. And in doing so, he had saved not just her life but his own. Together, they had built something beautiful out of pain and fear, had created a legacy of love that would outlast them both. This was their story, carved into the very land they walked on, written in the faces of their children and grandchildren. A story of survival and courage, of choosing love over fear, of two broken people making each other whole. And every night for the rest of their long lives together, Carson thanked whatever force had brought Willa to his gate that cold winter night. She had been dying when he found her, but in saving her, she had given him life. Real life, full of joy and purpose and more love than he had ever imagined possible. They grew old together on that Montana ranch, watching seasons change and children grow and the world transform around them. And when they finally passed, many years later and only days apart, because neither could bear to be without the other, they were buried together on a hill overlooking the land they had loved and the life they had built. Their children placed a single headstone over both their graves with words that captured the essence of their story, together forever as they always were. And beneath that, a simple phrase that said everything: love conquers all. The ranch continued through the generations, passed down through their children and their children's children. The story of how it all began, of the freezing woman and the lonely rancher who saved each other, became family legend. It was told around fires on cold winter nights, a reminder that the greatest love stories are not the easiest ones, but the ones where people choose each other every single day, through every hardship and challenge. And somewhere in the Montana wind that still howls across those plains, if you listen carefully on a quiet night, you can almost hear it. The echo of a love that was strong enough to survive anything, to overcome everything, to build something beautiful and lasting out of the coldest, darkest night. That is the story of Carson Irving and Willa Kershaw, the lonely rancher and the freezing woman who found each other when they both needed it most. A story of survival and love, of courage and hope, of two souls who were meant to find each other no matter what stood in their way. And it is a story with the happiest of endings, because they got exactly what they both deserved. A lifetime of love, surrounded by family, on land they called their own. They fought for their happiness and won, and in winning, showed everyone who came after them that love really can conquer all, if you are brave enough to fight for it. The end came peacefully for both of them, Carson at 82 and Willa at 79, their hands clasped together even in death. Their children mourned but also celebrated, knowing their parents had lived exactly the life they wanted, had loved exactly the way everyone hopes to be loved. The ranch still stands today, over 100 years later, a testament to what two people can build when they choose love over fear, hope over despair. The gate where Carson found Willa has been preserved, a historical marker now explaining its significance. And every winter, when the snow falls heavy and the wind howls cold, people say you can still feel the warmth of their love emanating from that spot. This is the true story of the lonely rancher who found a freezing woman at his gate, warmed her by the fire in his heart, and in doing so, found his own salvation. It is a story that reminds us all that even in our darkest moments, when we feel most alone and most broken, love can find us. And when it does, if we are brave enough to reach for it, it can change everything.